I think the light environment is hugely important, and we should think about it almost like we think about junk food. The same with light. There are certain beneficial wavelengths of light, and these red wavelengths of light are very beneficial, and these are the ones you see at sunrise and sunset. And then there are certain wavelengths of light that you don't want to have all the time, like the blue wavelengths of light.
Our next guest, CERAThrive, has pioneered the use of red light therapy to support the gut and the gut-brain axis. Sarah is the founder and CEO of CERAThrive, a company that created the first FDA-cleared CERA system, an innovative TPBM device that stands for transcranial photobiomodulation.
The gut seems to heal first, which is very interesting. People call it the second brain, don't they? The gut is your main sense organ. So actually, I think the gut probably is the most important target.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. Our next guest, CERAThrive, has pioneered the use of red light therapy to support the gut and the gut-brain axis. Sarah is the founder and CEO of CERAThrive, a company that created the first FDA-cleared CERA system, an innovative TPBM device that stands for transcranial photobiomodulation. Sarah holds postgraduate degrees in clinical neuroscience, nutritional medicine, and a diploma in photobiomodulation. Her work highlights the intersection of quantum biology, photomedicine, and consciousness. She created a documentary movie called SuperCharged. She co-hosts the Rebel Scientist podcast. She is here today to share the impact that photobiomodulation and red light therapy can have on the human body, maybe your human body. Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the intro. That was great.
So before we jump into your area of expertise, I want to go further back, much further back. What was it like growing up, little Sarah? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? If there was some event or someone you could pinpoint to the reason you would ultimately become a biohacker and start a health business focused on red light therapy and the microbiome, what or who would they be?
Wow, I never normally get asked that, Chris, so straight away. Well, I grew up in Hertfordshire, which is a county that borders North London. And maybe one of the things that really got me started with a science career was my dad used to constantly read me the Sherlock Holmes story. And Sherlock Holmes is all about investigating and, using your rationality to discover all of these crazy mysteries and adventures. So I think looking back, I've kind of wondered myself because, I don't have this story that I was incredibly ill and I was trying to find something to cure myself, which is a lot of the kind of founder stories for these kind of companies. But actually, I think it was that upbringing. I studied fairly orthodox science. My early career was actually pharmaceuticals. I was a research scientist in pharmaceutical companies in my early career. So I had actually quite an orthodox scientific education. And it wasn't till a bit later when I started investigating things like electrostatic charge in devices and things when I was working for these big drug companies that I started to look at a more alternative approach. But my mum was a vegetarian back at a time where that was very unfashionable. So I suppose I already had a little bit of an introduction to a little bit of an alternative lifestyle. But yeah, growing up in the muddy home counties of outer London was, I think, a fairly ordinary upbringing.
Oh, that's very cool. So certainly we have Sherlock Holmes in common. I absolutely grew up. I didn't have a parent reading it to me, but I just actually dove into them. And I also am kind of in the health space without a pain to passion story. I was just in the right place at the right time and trying to do right by people. So it's kind of cool that we have that in common. Can you talk a little bit about your history, kind of education, right? So psychology, then biology, then nutrition, then clinical neuroscience, ended up starting CERAThrive. Maybe walk us up to that, right? Obviously, we know now it doesn't have a pain to passion story, but how'd you ultimately land where you're at now?
Yeah, I've always been interested in biology and how the body works. So I started off with a simple biology degree. I became interested in how our thoughts play into that. So I finished up with a psychological science degree, which is kind of the biological side of psychology and how our brain is working and what kind of our thoughts and our intentions and emotions are having on that biology. I think now it would be called psychoneuroimmunology. You know, that's kind of like a new term that grew up after that. And then I went to the drug companies and I got involved in various things. I was looking mainly at drug delivery devices, particularly asthma devices. And it was there that I got an idea of it's a lot more than just delivering a drug to a person that's going to have an effect on health. And in fact, it's more to do with the state of our environment internally and externally, and things like when you're delivering drugs, in particularly asthma drugs, the state of the person, like whether they're grounded or not, has a huge effect. And this I found out through various experiments when I was actually we used like an artificial lung. I was grounded. I have different lab coats with like silver thread or rubber welly boots to try and look at the effect of grounding on drug delivery devices.
So were you aware, so this is an experiment that who figures out that grounding has an impact, right? Like, because just to fundamentally realize that grounding has an impact has to be some sort of laboratory accident that somebody discovered, I would imagine.
So from a point of view of a drug company, they have a particular asthma inhaler that's not working on everyone, which was what they had. So then they call a task force together, and that was normally my job in the drug companies, is to be a task force, like you're brought in when there's an issue, your remit is to solve the issue. So the issue is one of these delivery devices is not working for everyone. So it was a plastic device. So one of our theories is perhaps there's some static charge building up in the device. So it's, this is not coming from the point of view of grounding at all. This is just coming from a point of view of how do we make these delivery devices more effective if there's an issue. So actually, I was doing all these experiments and finding out that actually you get different fine particles of the drug delivering different areas of the lung, depending on whether you ground yourself. And in a lab, that looks like attaching yourself to a grounding cable. But the inference there is, in reality, that is a person that could ground themselves on the floor and then have a different impact on where the drug is being delivered. And in actual fact, if you do that, if you're grounded and you're making sure you don't have static charge in the body, a lot of these things become more effective because the drug will be delivered to the place where it's needed most, and then potentially you need less drug. But of course, the drug companies are not looking at that. The drug companies, the solution to the drug company was, let's use a different plastic.
Yeah.
Problem solved from the drug company point of view. But that really got me interested. And actually, I left the drug company shortly after that to study nutrition because, my rationale is, okay, we're kind of doing all these things, delivering drugs in this way, but we can do so much more with the person even before we get to the drug. So grounding, eating the right food, having the correct environment, potentially you could not need the drug at all if you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the people that I get to interview, and you probably get to interview, are of that mindset. Kind of looking back, do you remember what your first biohack was? Like, what was the first thing that you were doing that maybe it wasn't necessarily conventional, but was definitely healthy?
Well, actually, after doing these experiments in my very early career, I was grounding a lot, at a time when that wasn't so much of a thing. And actually afterwards, many years afterwards, I interviewed the guys that wrote the book Earthing.
Mm.
And so, that was interesting to me to get that validated. But I mean, obviously, a lot of people have been grounding for a long time. I mean, really, grounding is just sitting out on the grass, but it's doing it in a way that you kind of making it part of your routine, that you do it every day. And it's best to do it I find it's best to do it in the morning, where you're also getting your kind of sun exposure. But I think that was probably an early thing. But like I say, also, I was always into more, it used to be called alternative health, didn't it? Back before biohacking was a word. So I think perhaps I was always doing some of these alternative health practices. But I would say grounding was the first one that's now a recognized biohack.
So you said your mother was vegetarian, right? So did you kind of experiment with vegetarianism at any point, or?
Well, my mum was vegetarian. For my whole life. So up until I left home, I was a vegetarian by default.
Yeah.
And at that time, that meant getting on a train, going up to Neil's Yard in Covent Garden, buying all the pulses and things and going home. It wasn't like you could get stuff from the store back then. So again, that was a little bit out of the ordinary. Nobody wanted to come to my house for tea after school because it was all all a bit weird. But yeah, so I was a vegetarian as a child by default. I'm not now, actually. And I kind of I'm more favoring like very good protein sources and things, kind of more the biohacker way. But yeah, I think, good vegetarian food, it's whole food. So it's healthy food. So, compared to a lot of diets, it is a very healthy diet. But you do just have to be very strict with it and make sure you're getting all your protein, your amino acids. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of my theories is like whatever the diet is, you're going to have improvements because you're off of the standard American diet. Like as soon as you just get off of that, then you're doing much better. So you were involved in the documentary Supercharged, included Dave Asprey, Ben Greenfield, Abel James. I've been fortunate enough to interview them. They're all experts that I've had on my podcast, like I just mentioned. Talk about that documentary. How did that come about?
So I came to California with a company where we were looking at consciousness interface devices, and I was the head of research, looking at whether or not we can influence random event generators in computers with the power of conscious intention. So fairly woo-woo science, actually, but very interesting. And I spent quite a lot of time kind of speaking to a lot of different people. Initially, kind of people who are doing very fringe science. But shortly after moving to California was the start of all the biohacking movement. I think it was like the first Dave Asprey conference, and there was a lot of very interesting people doing kind of stuff that I hadn't been taught in my degrees. I have got like 3 science degrees, and nobody ever mentioned any of these things like grounding or sunlight or how the body interacts with light on a actual fundamental biological level. So for me, it was great. And I was working with a fellow Brit out there, and we decided to film a movie about it because it was, it was just so interesting. Things like Iceman he was someone who we interviewed who really nobody had heard of back then. And so now, he's exploded because it's interesting, practical science. And I think that's why it was so cool. So, I had a great time. I went round interviewing all these people. I went to a lot of different countries, met a lot of people on that project.
That's really cool. Did photobiomodulation come up in that documentary?
It did, but in a slightly different way, because one of the main people we were interviewing was Professor Jerry Pollack, who is a guy he's actually a materials scientist out of Washington University. And he wrote the book Fourth Phase of Water. Now this is a book about how light interacts with water on a fundamental level and can actually change the structure of water. And he was doing experiments using Nafion tubing, which is just like a tubing with a specific charge, but it actually has a similar quality to membranes that you would find in the body. So he was finding that if you shine light onto water, you can charge separate the water, which means that you can have next to a surface, you can have a negatively charged water, and then in the bulk water, it's positively charged. Now, this kind of opens huge amounts of interesting doorways for biology, because potentially then water could be acting as a battery in the body. Water can actually be an energy source for the body. So although it wasn't strictly photobiomodulation in that he wasn't talking about how light affects biology, he was talking more from a materials point of view, the translation into biology was hugely interesting. And that's really what got me started looking at, okay, if we can change the structure of water, potentially that can have a huge effect on the body. And all you need is light to do that. You just need a light source. So red and near infrared light will have this effect on the body. Therefore, these kind of photobiomodulation, which again, it's not a new term, it's something that's been going for a very long time. But perhaps water is one of the ways that light is transmuting energy that we can use in the body. And maybe it's doing it via water. So I got into photobiomodulation a slightly different way to a lot of people who were kind of looking at it from a point of view of just mitochondrial, how it stimulates the mitochondria. I was getting into it more from a viewpoint of how it actually changes the structure of water potentially in the body. And the brain, the brain, we're over 70% water. So to me, it was like, well, it must be having an effect.
Yeah. Walk us a little bit further down that path, right? So you're looking at the impact that light can have on water. We're made up of water. Maybe some other people were talking about kind of red light therapies, et cetera, in terms of health things. And you decide to put together CERAThrive.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, because I have a clinical neuroscience background, I was thinking, well, it's very interesting that we can structure water, and there are some potential health benefits. And initially, I looked into making a structured water company because I thought, well, we need to have this. Why haven't we got this? But then I thought, well, let's cut out the middleman and let's just go structure the body itself. And I started to wonder if that was possible. And at the time, this was probably like 2017. I started to look to see, are people doing this already? Is there any way that I can actually get some direct experience? And of course, it's not a new idea actually to shine light onto the head to have an effect. People have been doing it for a long time. And I was lucky enough to get accepted to do data collection on a trial for Parkinson's disease. And this was Baylor Scott and White. It was going on University of Texas. The clinical study collection was going on in Philadelphia. So I went to Philadelphia for 6 months and got involved in the data collection on a Parkinson's trial, which was double blind using longer wave near infrared, which is 1070 nanometers. We can get into what that means in a bit later if you like. But actually, from doing the data collection, it was very apparent that it was having a positive effect. You could very clearly see people who were on the sham and people who were on the active. But it wasn't a very user-friendly device. And really, that's what started me thinking, we definitely should have this therapy because it's working. The drugs don't really work for neurodegeneration at the moment. We don't have a good drug that can help people. And why don't we just make it simple? So initially, I didn't really aim to have a company. I just wanted to get this device made that would be easy. And I was doing some brain coaching at the time, potentially I could use for myself and people that I was working with. So that's really how the company came about. It was more by accident than kind of it's my intention to have a neurotech company. It wasn't like that at all. I really just wanted to make a device that was easy to use and simple because I could see that it was working.
So you're doing this Parkinson study. So one thing, you're at 1070 nanometers.
That's right.
What's the control in that situation? Because I'm a scientist, I'm always thinking, okay, the control in a lot of things is water, because that does not have an effect unless, we could have a debate about that, right? With structured water. But in the case of light, right, if you're shining light, you're shining it on the cranium at some place. Like, can you describe that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so the device that was used in the particular study was a pancranial, so it went over the whole head, and it was a light source, and also because the lights were quite bright, then a fan was needed to remove any heat, because there are limits to the heat you can put on the head. So can you imagine like a big device with fans all over it, making a huge noise, quite heavy, and shining light. Now the light that's used in this kind of therapy is near infrared. So it's invisible. It's not in the visible spectrum. So you can't tell if the light's on or off by the human eye.
Interesting.
So in this case, it's very easy to do a sham because the sham device just has all the whirring fans, but it doesn't have the light.
Interesting. Okay, so that was the control. And then what were some of the benefits that they noticed in the Parkinsonians patients?
So the study was looking at things like gait analysis, it was looking at reaction speeds, and it was looking at blood biomarkers. It was also looking at qualitative EEG. So that's a brain scan. So I was involved mainly in the tests for gait analysis and reaction time, which improved in the active group for almost all people. They got a very good statistically significant result for almost all of these markers. But out of all of that, I got to see the day-to-day interactions of these people, because if you're looking at a scientific study, and we can attach it for your readers, you get to see these kind of very dry statistics. Gait analysis, may have improved by a certain percentage. But I was actually communicating with these people. I was the one who was seeing them being able to button up cardigans that they hadn't been able to button up when they came in. I was the one who was seeing them actually having a conversation with their carer where before they kind of had a flat effect and nothing was going on. I was the one who, when they were brought in by their husbands or wives, their husbands' wives were saying to me, I don't know what you're doing, but I had a row for the first time ever. My partner is back. She actually has an opinion about something again when there's been nothing for years. So all of that stuff doesn't get reported. Unfortunately, a lot of that gets lost. We're looking at, okay, what was the blood biomarker? Did the cytokines go up or down? Very interesting. More interesting to me was to see these people getting back to having relationships again, which is really what life, it's great that their biomarkers were improving. It's more great that they were able to actually participate to a certain extent in family life. And I'm not saying these people kind of had a reverse of their symptoms. And I'm actually not saying it was pretty all the time, because there's a lot of resistance. If you're used to having everything done for you, to all of a sudden being able to do everything for yourself, it's a responsibility that some people, are not that keen to have back.
Yeah.
It's not always pretty, but it was a definite result. Even someone getting angry with me, I had one lady and she was brought in all the time. She never really had much, she would sit down, I would say hello, she wouldn't really respond. And then at the end, they said, oh, so, it's the end. Are you glad to see Sarah? She's like, no, I'd be glad to never come back here again. And you're like, that's amazing, because this person had nothing going on. Now they've got an opinion. Now they're angry. Now they're relating. So to me, that was what really inspired me to move forward to say, yeah, we need this, because this is something where you don't see this in you don't see this in any other study, really.
And so your mindset is, how do we get this kind of bulky fan whirling machine? How do we get, what can we do? And so what does that start to look like? Does it start to look like something that's a little bit more pointed so it only goes in one spot, or how do you kind of manifest from, what's the current device look like? I haven't even had the chance to kind of look into it.
Maybe I'll get one and show you in a sec. Let me get one. I've probably got them because I'm doing an event, so I'm charging up.
Awesome.
So this is what the finished product looks like for me. And this came about from pairing up with a really cool Dutch company. You can see, I've got my Dutch orange in there.
Yeah.
And kind of just setting out the specification. I wanted something that just goes in the forehead, because this is the prefrontal cortex. This is our decision making, but this is also where we have a lot of projections coming out from the center of the brain. Because what we do know about light from doing different studies is it doesn't go very deep. So something is going on to either bring that light deeper into the brain. Perhaps neurons are acting as waveguides, or perhaps it's the water, perhaps it's something going on with the glial cells. But whatever the reason is, it seems like if you target this area, the prefrontal cortex, that's where you get a good result. And also we don't have hair there. And hair is a barrier, or it can scatter the light. So that was one of the requirements. I also do have a little one that goes on the cerebellum, because that just is so important for movement and emotionality. And also I didn't want the big fans. So there is a way that you can do. Actually, you don't need hugely powerful LEDs to do it. And also you can do it in a way that you can kind of sink the heat away. So that's how this device has been designed. So you don't need the big fans. And another one of my innovations was to use a body panel at the same time, because then you can get a high dose of light in. You don't have to have the big old clunky fans. And also the gut for any kind of neurodegeneration or any kind of chronic illness is also hugely important. And I was actually thinking that was missing from a lot of these studies. If you target your brain and your second brain at the same time, you're going to potentially get an increased effect, because the gut health is so intrinsic to any kind of brain health.
Absolutely.
So I just switch it on, and you can see, because for mine, I have put red, because although the study was done on just near infrared, I'm also trying to make sure that I target as many light receivers in the body as possible. And also it helps to know that it's on. Red light will be very superficial, but there are a lot of light receivers in the blood. So I actually have 4 wavelengths of light instead of the 1, because there is a lot of different research coming out. Different researchers use different wavelengths. So I've just combined all of the wavelengths that are currently showing potential in the research.
And what are those 4 wavelengths?
So 630 is the visible red that you can see. And then I have 850, which is a near infrared, which has been shown to have great effect on the brain and will actually get through the skull. And then I have 940. Again, there's a lot of literature on that wavelength. And then the 1070. And the 1070 and the 940 are the ones where water will start to act as a chromophore. And that just means a light receiver in the body.
And then you've got the same kind of wavelengths that so it sits on your abdomen, basically, right? And And
so you can kind of you can see a little bit that light's on, but for the human eye, mainly this one's not visible. So that's the 850 there. And,
cool.
And actually the abdomen or the gut is a great target for this kind of therapy, because, you haven't got to get through bone. For most people, it's very accessible. It's comfortable to put there. Your vagus nerve is there. The microbiome's there. There's a lot of blood flowing through that area. But it doesn't necessarily have to go on the abdomen. This device can go wherever, and people do use it for pain relief. But I'm doing the gut-brain connection together because I think that's, and again, this is something that's now coming out more and more. I see papers published on this all the time about the connection between the gut and the brain for chronic disease. And it goes the other way. People think about IBS. There's a strong brain emotional stress component in that.
Yep.
Yeah, we all know that if we've got to do a presentation or something, we get butterflies in the gut. That's where you feel it, because you have this biodirectional communication.
So you were a little ahead of the game when you were kind of coming out with this pad that you're putting on your stomach, and then all these papers start coming out with the gut-brain axis. That's really cool. And are there any wavelengths that we should avoid if we think about light in general? Obviously not from your device, but like in general, like maybe we should be mindful.
Oh yeah, I think the light environment is hugely important, and we should think about it almost like we think about junk food. There's certain foods that you should really avoid. It doesn't matter if you have them now and then, but you don't want to be living on crisps and biscuits and sweets. But the same with light. There are certain beneficial wavelengths of light, and these red wavelengths of light are very beneficial. And these are the ones you see at sunrise and sunset. And then there are certain wavelengths of light that you don't want to have all the time, like the blue wavelengths of light. You don't really want to be exposed to that day and night, because that's not really how our bodies have evolved. We wouldn't, up until fairly recently, a few hundred years ago, you wouldn't have been able to see blue light 24 hours. So blue light can be thought of as kind of junk light. You should really think, okay, like blue light. Most technology utilizes blue light because the wavelength is short, which means it's very energy efficient. So it's easier to produce blue. So most phones or computers or screens are using this blue light. So we should be aware of that and not be kind of just looking at blue light, morning till night. And also, fluorescent lights contain a lot of wavelengths that potentially you want to avoid, all the time.
I imagine you, like me, are currently sitting in front of some lights that we should limit our exposure to.
I've got a massive window here, which is great. So there are little hacks you can do. Like, I'm here in an Airbnb in LA. So where do I station myself? Okay, drag the table over to this nice big window so that I don't have to have the blue light on all the time. We're speaking here, but then I'll go for a walk to kind of make sure I get natural light. So we do live indoor lifestyles. That's why these red light therapy devices are so important, because we're putting back wavelengths that we're missing. But there are little hacks you can do to try and improve your own environment with regards to light. And especially, if you're not in an Airbnb and you're in your own home, you can change the light bulbs, you can change the light sources, you can dim the lights at night. There are lots of things you can do.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS 60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. we'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
With your devices, so is there any time constraint? Should we, I'm assuming it's got like set patterns. Should we not exceed it? Is there concerns if we exceed it? And maybe are there time frames that one should use the CERAThrive versus, don't use it late?
So our bodies are very sensitive to light, and we're kind of programmed to go with a day-night cycle. So our bodies are expecting to see red light at sunrise and red light at sunset, and then really not much light at night, if possible. And our eyes are how we calibrate that. So with these devices, it's best if you have one, you can use it in the evening after dark, but just don't look into it, put it that with my device, you can put it on and turn it on, you're not looking into it if you're using it after dark. And I think that's a general rule of thumb, is try as best you can to follow what would be a natural cycle. So, wake up, have maybe dimmed red light in your room until daylight. And the same with these devices. And there is something called a biphasic dose response, which means, it's a bit like Goldilocks, you can have you can have too little and you can have too much. It needs to be just right. But actually that window is very big. And on these devices, which are fairly low power, you don't have to worry too much about overdoing it unless you're very ill. Because if your mitochondria are kind of very depleted, you don't need much of the red light to bring them up. And it's not to say that it's really going to do you any damage, but it might just negate the beneficial effect if you kind of sit on a red light bed or use one of these panels or one of these devices for too long. But, for most people, 10 or 20 minutes is all you need. There's no need to overdo it. There's no need to go too long on these red light therapy devices.
Red light therapy is supposed to be good for hair growth, right? For thicker hair. Is your device work in that same wavelength, or might that be a different wavelength?
Yeah, so for hair growth, hair is fairly superficial. It's kind of there on the surface, just under the skin. And the reason why it's so good is that red light targets the mitochondria. That's one of the things it does, and gives the cell a lot more energy. So if you're shining light onto like the hair follicle there, you're just giving it a lot more energy to do its thing, and so the hair grows. But my device is specifically for brain. So my device is longer wave. So no, it's not really targeted for hair growth. Potentially you could put the body panel on top of your head because that's red light. So,
that's what I was thinking.
You could do that for sure. Yeah, for sure you could do that. There are a lot of really cool devices that are specifically for hair growth, where they kind of even have projections that go into your hair. But anything that's red and flexible, anything that is
Look at that.
contoured.
That looks perfect.
It doesn't it? Yeah. But one of the things is the angle of penetration, because if you can imagine, light only goes in a straight line. And if it, comes to a curved surface, it's going to bounce off. So, you can see my face looks red. That's because the light is being reflected off. That light's not going in. So in order to kind of get the benefit from these devices, you really need to have something that's contoured and flush to the body. So a lot of the panels, if you're standing next to a panel, that probably isn't going to help too much with hair growth. They're good. The panels are good. They give you kind of a general wellness. But if you really want to get the light having the best effect, it does need to be flush, and it does need to be the right curvature so that the light's going to go in.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that there might even be some stuff. I haven't seen one where they could be on little fingers, right? The red lights could be on the end of little fingers.
That's exactly what some of them look like. Some of them are hairbrushes. There's all kinds. Some of them are a band that goes over the top. But basically, whatever you use, you want to have something that's curved to your head.
Right.
But yeah, they're very effective.
So we know that we've got this red light benefiting mitochondria. In fact, if you've got, you just kind of suggested, if you've got damaged mitochondria, you might want to ease into this and maybe build up your times on it. So be mindful of that. Do we have theories of like what it's doing in the mitochondria? Like, is it impacting the electron transport chain? Like, do we kind of understand what might be going on there?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that now, for sure. So like you said, the mitochondria has the electron transport chain, and that's how we produce ATP, which is the energy molecule. Now, within the electron transport chain, there is one specific protein called cytochrome C oxidase. Not to kind of get too granular about it, but it's one of the enzymes that's involved in this electron cascade to make ATP. When light is shone onto the mitochondria, it's this particular enzyme that is stimulated. So this causes a release of nitric oxide, a dissociation of water, which means more water around the mitochondria, and it causes the ATPase to spin a little faster. So you get a production of more ATP. So that's kind of what's happening on that very granular level. The outcome of that is you have transient release of nitric oxide gas. So that means the blood vessels all around will dilate, because that's what nitric oxide does in the body. One of its functions. It's also a signaling molecule. And so that means greater blood flow. So you have one more energy in the form of ATP. Then you have greater blood flow. So you have more oxygen coming in, more waste products being removed. And then you also have a release of reactive oxygen species. So this is very interesting, because we're taught so much about how we should have antioxidants, because reactive oxygen species is an oxidant. And so potentially we're creating oxidants in the body. And when I first read about this, I thought, well, this is funny, because I've been taught in my nutrition degree that we need antioxidants. We want to kind of mop these up. But actually these a very low level of these oxidants are like a low level stressor on the body. And it's a bit like exercise. If you kind of go to the exercise, if you're lifting something, it's stressful. It's work for the body, but that work makes the body stronger. And I think that's a lot of what's going on in light therapy. It's a low level stress, and it then causes the body to kind of react in a way that makes you stronger. So potentially you make more mitochondria to deal with what's going on. If you have more mitochondria, you have more energy. So a lot of the effects of red light therapy is cumulative. As you use it, the body becomes more and more used to the light therapy, make more and more mitochondria, you have more blood flow, you have more and more of these signaling molecules. So you see, as you kind of go through using these programs, a greater effect of using the light. Just like going to the gym, if you go to the gym consistently for 6 months, you're going to get a stronger body. But you have to do it consistently, and you have to do it over a period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. And the other thing that I think that these signaling molecules are doing, because the mitochondria is sort of like a bacteria this is one of the theories at least, that was brought into a unicellular organism as a kind of synergistic organism, if you like. So it has its own DNA, and that then allows it to communicate with the cellular DNA, almost like act as a light sensor and say, okay, we're starting to heal now. There's light coming in. Let's activate some healing proteins. And actually in the brain, this is hugely interesting, because we see epigenetic switching of proteins in the brain. This can lead to synaptogenesis, neurogenesis, all this stuff that is unbelievably good for us as we age, or for anything really. We all want to have new neurons. We all want new brain cells, in other words.
How deep are these light waves penetrating?
So into the brain, probably a few millimeters onto the surface of the brain's cortex.
Okay.
So not very deep. Not very deep when you imagine that Parkinson's is in the substantia nigra. That's where we have degeneration of neurons. So some think it's happening to have a global effect, which is kind of why I focused initially on water, because it could be that you're having this kind of change in the structure of water, which has a systemic global effect.
Yeah. If you make some change, some structure, some of the water that's at the depth that it can, that's going to migrate to other areas. Did you, from the very beginning, when you were starting CERAThrive, did you immediately, I need to deal with the prefrontal cortex, I need to deal with the gut biome, and you need to deal with what's the back one?
The cerebellum.
The cerebellum. Were you like right away, that's what you have to do, and kind of what drove that? Or did you think, let me just start with prefrontal cortex? Or even kind of, I think it would have been ironic, right? Or not obvious to start with the gut.
I based all of the specifications on currently published data. So a lot of the data that is published is on the frontal cortex because it's accessible and because a lot of people who are much cleverer than I had worked out that that's the best place to deliver light. The gut, to me, because, you know, I've done naturopathic nutrition, you know, the gut is an obvious place, but actually, you know, a lot of neurotransmitters are made in the gut, you know, an overwhelmingly huge proportion. I mean, the gut actually has a lot of neural tissue. And now also there's a lot of data to suggest there's some fabulous work by some Australian researchers led by Dr. Anne Liebert that are showing that you actually change your microbiome profile before and after red light therapy. Now, in an animal, in a mouse model, we think that you're actually the bacteria themselves are utilizing the light because, again, bacteria and mitochondria are not really that different in structure. In a human, we don't quite know because it's whether you're getting the light deep enough to actually affect the microbiome. Maybe the main thing that's happening is you're healing the kind of leaky gut or leaky junctions in the gut to make a better environment for the good bacteria. But, you know, in some people, it could be that we're affecting the bacteria directly. However it's working, the gut is hugely important for red light therapy. And it seems to be something that heals first. That was something that I wasn't expecting, actually. A lot of people who are now using my device, maybe they initially tried it because they want to help with symptoms of neurodegeneration. And I say, how are you getting on? Oh, did I tell you that I had IBS and now it's totally gone?
Wow.
And it's like, well, no, you didn't mention that, probably because that's not the kind of main thing that your main goal. But actually, the gut seems to heal first, which is very interesting. And, you know, people call it the second brain, don't they, the gut? But actually, from an embryological point of view, it's the first brain. It develops first. There's more communication from your gut to your brain than the other way around. There's more kind of innovation. All your neurotransmitters are made there. It's your main sense organ. So actually, I think the gut probably is the most important target site. After doing all of this, I think if you get your gut right, then, you know, a lot of the brain symptoms disappear anyway.
Mm. So you could almost go back and just use the gut panel. Like that might be a viable product as well.
It would. I think getting light onto the gut. So what also I do with the headband, because I think you can get a lot of light in through the gut, but with the headband, what we can also do is neuroentrainment, because we know that the brain is oscillating at different frequencies. We know that the brain has, you know, when you're asleep, when you're attending to something, the brain is putting out different oscillations. Now we can actually just pulse the light that's coming out of the headband to entrain those frequencies. So, for example, if you're struggling to concentrate or kind of focus on anything, we know that when the brain is doing that and it's healthy, it's oscillating at a gamma frequency, which is 40 hertz. And 40 hertz just means 40 times per second. So we can then flash these lights at 40 times a second, almost like a tuning fork. You know, we're saying, this is what 40 times a second looks like. And the brain actually entrains to those frequencies. So we can kind of make the therapy a bit more sophisticated in that we shine light in through the gut. We're still shining light onto the brain, but we're using that more for neuroentrainment. So then you're kind of getting neuromodulation and photobiomodulation as kind of a combined treatment. And that also seems to be very effective.
So the 40 hertz, it ties into research that they did to remove amyloid plaques from rats, which was incredibly complex to begin with. They actually genetically modified them so that their brains would react to a certain light. And then it cleared out 80% of the amyloid plaques. And then they were like, but we can't do that retroactively to any of our patients. We can't go genetically modify them so their brains react to light. So they tried it with just lights, had a similar effect. I think it was on par with 80%. So you're able to get some of that with 40. So how much of the technology is kind of geared towards entraining different wavelengths?
So what I have is 6 programs that you can select using an app. And each of those 6 programs is utilizing a different pulse frequency. So I have 7.8, which is a Schumann frequency that we can use to kind of calm people down, because if you can imagine your kind of brain is very reactive, and if you're very highly stressed, your brain is oscillating maybe a little bit higher than you would like it to be. So we can kind of use these lower frequencies to calm people, and not everyone's brain is the same. There's a little bit of trial and error in this, and maybe your brain is adjusted for different frequencies, but as a rule of thumb, we can kind of use these lower frequencies. Also 10 hertz, which is alpha, that's also one that has shown a lot of interesting effects when you apply an alpha frequency, and people use this for other conditions, PTSD, things like that. Then we have a gamma, and then I also have 100 hertz, which is sometimes called high gamma. And that one has been shown to help people get into meditation or help with altered states. And the reason I put that one in is because I went to a fabulous lecture with some guys led by Jay Sanguinetti at Arizona University, but they were using ultrasound. And they had meditators and they were using it with ultrasound. So I went up to them afterwards and asked them, we can do it with sound. Do you think we can do it with light? And they had done some experiments with light, so they were able to confirm that. So again, that one, not so much in the literature on 100 hertz, but I put it in there because, that's the data on sound. And actually, people like that frequency. Not always for meditation. Sometimes people say that they conversely use that one for sleep. It just goes to show we don't quite know exactly which of these brainwaves are going to have what effect on which person. But certainly people do seem to have different effects depending on how you're pulsing the light. And then I have two programs which are just constant wave. So that's just full dose. So that's non-pulsing. But with a lot of these LEDs and things, even the constant wave has a certain amount of pulse to it because it's just how the LEDs work. So that's very, very high frequency. But we call it constant wave because it's, perceptively it's a constant wave.
So I have a Mindy device, right, which measures the blood flow. Have you played around with your device's impact on some of these? There's a Sensi device, Mindy, I can't remember what others that are going to really trying to, in an ideal world, you could have the ability to kind of measure all of your brain waves. Have you played around with those?
Yeah, for sure. And I have in development a lot of different innovations to look at measuring, simultaneously measuring. I mean, I have a device that I use at the moment that does EEG, and I can use it before and after. So I'm looking to kind of partner with that company. But I also have my tech guys, they're looking at, there's all different ways we could potentially monitor the brain to have a more targeted approach. So yeah, EEG, maybe something called functional near infrared, which is where you shine infrared light in, and then you're able, by looking at the signal coming out, to assess blood oxygenation of the cortex. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting.
I believe.
What's it called?
The Mindy, MENDI.
Oh yes, the Mindy. Yeah, the Mindy, the Muse. Yeah, there are a lot of different devices that you can use to combine, and I do use a lot of devices. I use things like Aura as well to look at heart rate variability if I'm looking, but you can use Apple Watch or Whoop or Garmin or all those things. I have a really cool platform that allows me to bring in any wearable and kind of map it.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So it's just letting the technology catch up with us all, because we're all kind of, what's next? Okay, how can we measure it? How can we make it more targeted? So yeah, that is the next step, I think. For any of these devices, we're all kind of looking at how can we make it so that we can really get an idea of how this is having an effect. But right now, for most people, they can subject, they've got your own measuring device if you want. And there are very simple ways, good old diarying, even like questionnaires. I have a really nice questionnaire that I send out to people that is just looking at what is your main symptom? What is something that you haven't been able to do? What is your general wellness? And just kind of just doing that subjectively is also hugely helpful.
Yeah, you can get some sort of feedback. So your website says you're the first FDA-listed device focused on, I think, the gut. Tell me the specifics. I should have taken better notes. And I want to understand how that process was, because I would imagine that was a non-trivial process.
It is a trivial process.
Okay.
To get listed with the FDA, you just have to inform the FDA that you have a device, which is something that's done because the FDA currently doesn't have a category, brain health category.
Mm.
So you cannot be classified as or certified with the FDA for brain health right now because they don't have the category. Now, in the industry, this is something that we're all trying to remedy. And certainly it's one of my goals to get the research to a standard that will be accepted by the FDA so that we can then make a category. Now, that is a non-trivial process. That's 2 to 5 years and a lot of money to get to that point. So in the industry, there are a lot of people looking at different applications and which would be the fastest one or the most, the one that the FDA is more likely to approve or is more likely to be useful for people. So different companies are looking at different applications. So that's something that I have going on in the background. I know a lot of other companies also have that going on. But at the moment, nobody can make a health claim. So I'm talking to you about all of these different conditions, but really all we can really officially say is that we're taking someone from a baseline to better. So, and also I'm not making specific claims about my device from a health point of view. I have people with all different health issues who are using the device, but they're just, improving the symptom management and increased sleep, better relationships. That's where we're at in the industry right now. So when I'm FDA listed, it simply means that I'm on the FDA. I've listed with the FDA that I have a company and that it's a red light therapy company. There is a category that the FDA currently has for pain relief and increased circulation and wound healing, because there is a lot of, we've met the threshold of evidence for that. Red light therapy meets that threshold. And again, that is 510K exempt, which just means you don't have to do all of the certification to get that claim.
And your wavelengths fit for those, for like wound healing and
Yes.
Yeah, okay, excellent. And you did talk about blood flow earlier. Are we talking angiogenesis? Like, are we actually creating vessels, or is it just improving blood flow through the existing kind of physical body?
So we're just talking widening of the blood vessels in the immediate area where you have shone the light, because that's where you have the release of nitric oxide, and that is the effect of that. So you're getting a blood flow locally. Although, some of we don't know what's being transported in the blood. We now know that mitochondria are free floating and will travel to different sites. And potentially that's how you're getting a more systemic effect. So you could potentially get increased blood flow in different areas of the body too.
Are there wavelengths that can penetrate deeper that you've opted not to use just because you don't necessarily understand the health benefits or potentially detriment?
Yeah, so all of the wavelengths of light are targeting different receivers in the body, and that's why we use very specific wavelengths. So like when you see red light devices, you normally see that they're somewhere around 630, because that's an absorption peak for cytochrome C oxidase, this enzyme we spoke about earlier in the mitochondria. The same with 850. We know that there are different peaks where these particular enzymes will absorb light. 700, for example, not much absorbs that wavelength. So you won't see many of these red light devices using 700 nanometers, because there's nothing in the body yet that we've seen, and not that we know everything about how light works in the body by any stretch at all. But at the moment, most companies are focused on the mitochondria. Water will absorb above 900. So some companies are now using these longer wavelengths, and also cytochrome C oxidase to a certain extent. So there are kind of what looks to us but like biological zones where, we're not seeing this effect. There could be other things. We're starting to learn more and more, like green light, for example. Nobody was using green light. Now we know that there are opsins in the body, in the skin, that potentially green light will trigger. Green light won't go very deep, but surface level, because the body needs a longer wavelength of light in order to get through. So anything that's kind of very superficial, like blue, like green, that won't go deep into the body. The wavelength is too short. The longer wavelengths will go deeper into the body, but then perhaps they're being absorbed by water in the body, so they're not going to go really deep. So we don't really know whether 850 or 1070, for example, goes deeper into the body because we don't know the extent to which those wavelengths are going to be absorbed by water or fat or anything else that we've got going on as they kind of hit things in the body, especially in a live body, because a lot of these studies, you can imagine, it's very difficult to do on a live body. I mean, we can do animal studies, but a lot of the studies on penetration are done on animal cadavers.
So the concept of shining light into eyes, other than if you're trying to assess pupil dilation, is probably bad. Like most people would just say bad. Is there any benefits to shining any kind of wavelengths of light into our eyes?
Well, do you know there is a company, Lumathera, that's just got FDA approval for macular degeneration doing exactly that. They're
Wow.
using near infrared. But I'm
Okay.
not advocating people do this. This is something that does need to be done, with the
Under
right
supervision.
equipment.
Yeah.
Medical supervision and with the right equipment. So they have a machine now where they have shown that you can, because macular degeneration, again, we don't have another solution for it. It's showing huge promise. And now people are looking at all kinds of other eye conditions. So as a rule, you don't want to shine bright light into your eyes, but these kind of red light devices, especially if you're kind of having them at a distance, potentially they could be beneficial for eyesight, for sure. You just don't want to look in any bright light, and you don't want to kind of try and self-medicate with these things. But for sure, I think that's going to be huge. It's going to be like eye medicine using the red light therapy because it activates the mitochondria, works on a fundamental level. The other really interesting thing about the eyes is the retina is part of the brain. You can actually get to the brain through the eyes. So, yeah, I think light therapy for the eyes is something that's definitely coming. And I say it's great that we've already got one company that's got FDA approval for that.
Wow. No, as with so many of the conversation I have, there are exciting times ahead. This has been a fantastic conversation, as good as I expected. I have some wrap-up questions, and then we'll make sure people know how to really, I want people, about how much does your device cost typically? Because I don't think it's inexpensive. I don't think it's crazy expensive, but what's it typically?
It's $1,300 US on the website, and we're always kind of at events where we're kind of offering a reduction on that. If you come and find us at the events, I'm kind of on a bit of a whirlwind tour, so somewhere in America you'll find me. But yeah, $1,300 US, and that's both of the devices and the app. With this, we have sound files, we have meditations, we have breath work, we have different programs.
Yeah, that's excellent, and we'll come back to that. Make sure that they know how to find you, and then where to find you. Because I think not only do you have discounts at these events, but it's an opportunity for them to actually connect up to one. Like they can try one out at these events. Typically, is that correct?
That's correct. And we also now have quite a few clinics. So, if people want to try the device, normally there's somewhere, close by that we can refer people to also to try it out.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, let's get to our wrap-up questions. Sarah, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Well, I kind of only got a little bit of time to think about this because we spoke about it before the interview. But, I have a gene for high-risk Alzheimer's, which was, again, one of my other motivations for kind of getting on this and kind of seeing this. And so my motivation is to get to 100, but with a healthy brain.
Yes.
Healthy aging. I kind of don't have it in my mind that I'm one of these people that I want to live to 180 at all costs. I want a healthy brain. So whatever life I'm going to be granted, I'm very grateful for every day. Whatever life I'm going to be granted, I want to do it with a healthy brain. So to me, that's kind of my goal more than the actual length. It's the quality of the life more than the length of it.
Excellent. And how long do you think humans can live?
Well, here I am in LA, and I'm speaking to a lot of very interesting people in the regenerative medicine space. And most people here are putting the top limit on 180. But,
Wow.
We're hearing about all kinds of different creatures that actually have a greater longevity. Jellyfish and certain sharks. There's all kinds of animals that do live a much longer lifespan. And potentially, if we can learn their secrets, there is the potential there that we could live a lot longer. And also, if you're talking about an unaugmented human, if we can kind of put our consciousness in a cloud, potentially it's infinite.
Yeah, that's a different story
Yeah,
altogether.
that's a different
Um,
discussion.
what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts. To longevity and a long health span that you would share.
I still stick to the simple ones. For me, nature, as close as you can get with your light environment to nature. And that's a very simple one. That's just seeing sunrise as much as you can, kind of resetting your sleep schedule so that you can be up and get those morning rays. I think almost everybody now recognizes the importance of good sleep. And also just having fun, because I go to a lot of these events where, it's very serious. People are taking a certain amount of tablets. They're going to bed at 8:30. They're getting in their ice tubs. But to me, my heart rate variability, which is a good indication of your health, goes up when I'm out with my friends having a laugh. I
Yeah.
think we do need to not lose sight of that community and fun in amongst all the serious kind of technology and tablets and all these other things we should be doing. So prioritize friends, community, family, doing the things you love. That's my number one biohack.
And then nature. So we've got have fun with friends and then get reconnected to nature.
Get reconnected with nature or with your actual cycles, with your schedules, kind of suit your life to suit what, we would naturally be doing. Stand on the ground, go and smell the flowers, look at the sky, look at the sky at least an hour a day. I mean, a midday walk while you're doing it, you can do it with calls, you can fit it in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What are 1 to 2 things that people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
Well, one, I think, focusing on longevity rather than a healthy life, because I think that kind of can lead. We already know that we keep people alive on drugs maybe way too long now. I think that's something that we congratulate ourselves that we now have like a longer lifespan compared to what we used to have. But do we have a better life? So I think that to me is focusing on the wrong thing for sure. And then also with light, it's not surprising that people get it wrong, but it's very difficult to sort out, okay, is a sauna the same as a light therapy? No. People get all the terminology wrong with near infrared and what's happening there. But I think that's because, it's a new science and we don't quite have all the information out for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And you start talking nanometers, and I think people just
people glaze over. Yeah, for sure. And people are like, well, I do my infrared, I sit in a sauna every day. And I'm like, no, it's not the same infrared. And it's,
Yep.
Yeah. So I
All right,
think it's
Sarah.
just about getting educated on those kinds of things.
Yes. Sarah, how can people contact you?
So it's CERAThrive, CERA, like the brain, not like my name, CERAThrive. And I'm on all socials and CERAThrive.com. I'm pretty easy to find. Sarah at CERAThrive if people want to message me directly.
What are 2 or 3 events that you're going to be at here over this year?
So I'm doing a little day retreat next weekend here in LA. This is all on my socials. I'm doing Biohacker Expo where I think we're going to meet, which will be cool. I'm doing Coconut Grove Innokus ceremony, which is where they're doing a lot on gut brain and beauty, actually. That's a very interesting intersection. Don't Die. I'm going to be at Don't Die Miami. I'm going to be at Tallinn at the biohackers. They've moved from Finland to Tallinn this year. That's going to be very cool. So
Dave Asprey's biohacking.
Dave Asprey, of
Yep.
course. Dave Asprey's biohacking. Yeah, I'll be there. I'm going to be there with Noah and Non, who do the breathwork on my sound files. So that's going to be cool. We're going to be doing an experiential at Dave Asprey, so something slightly different.
Very cool. And then how about health optimization? Tim Gray's health optimization.
Yes, I'll be at the London one. Not the. I don't think I'll be in Austin. Perhaps. Actually, Tim and I were at Abu Dhabi last week at a really cool event. The Middle East is really popping off for all of these events. So we were discussing it. So I might be in Austin, but definitely London for sure.
Okay, excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Oh, I am just so excited about all the science that's coming out now. It seems like just this year is an explosion in interesting science, new discoveries, a lot in the regenerative medicine space. So, that's where I'm putting a lot of my focus right now.
That's very cool. Well, you can find her at CERAThrive.com. That's CERA Thrive.com. You can actually reach out to her at Sarah at CERAThrive, and that's SARAH at CERA Thrive.com. And then catch her at some of the events. You can try the devices. I've certainly been by your booth. I don't think I had a chance to stop by, which I will at the Biohacker Expo. I'm looking forward to that. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.